Welcome back to Verbal Sparring. In today's video, I'm going to predict who will dethrone every current UFC champion in 2026. 2025 featured some of the most title changes that we have seen in years in the UFC, and now it's time to discuss whether 2026 will have the same fate. And there are going to be some champions throughout the 11 UFC weight classes that I don't feel will necessarily lose their title in 2026, and if that's the case, I will at least mention who I believe that their greatest threat is in general. And none of these choices are made from favoritism or who I want to see win the belt. It's just who poses the biggest threat to each current champion and who I feel has the greatest chance to win from a stylistic perspective. So without further ado, let's head to the men's flyweight division, 125 pounds, to kick things off. Right now, the champion of the world at flyweight is Joshua Van after he dethroned Alexandre Pantoja at UFC 323 in the co-main event of the final pay-per-view ever. However, this fight didn't end normally. It wasn't a typical one-punch knockout or a submission or a decision. It was due to an arm injury suffered at the hands of Alexandre Pantoja as he was attempting to defend a takedown from Joshua Van in just 26 seconds into the bout. And heading into UFC 323, I did feel that Joshua Van would put up a good fight against Alexandre Pantoja, but I did not believe that he was going to be the one to dethrone Alexandre. And so what does that mean? That means that I don't feel that Joshua Van is the most sustainable champion by any means in the UFC's current state right now. And the man that I think will dethrone Joshua Van in 2026 is Tatsuro Taira, and he will become the first Japanese champion in UFC history. Now, there are a couple of factors that could keep this fight from even happening in 2026, one of them being that Alexandre Pantoja's injury was not as serious as what it looked like in December, so he may be able to return in the second half of 2026, and when he does return, you best believe he will be getting a crack at his once held title. And the second problem is that Tatsuro Taira isn't the only number one contender in this division, because you could also argue that Manel Kape has earned just as much of a right to fight for the title. But in one of the other previous videos I did here on the channel where I talked about one fight that I want to see in every division, check that out if you haven't already, shameless plug, I did say that for flyweight, the fight that I wanted to see the most was Joshua Van versus Tatsuro Taira, so hopefully that will be Joshua Van's first title defense in the first half of 2026, and if they do step into the octagon, I believe that it will be Tatsuro Taira that will get his hand raised. I believe that Tatsuro Taira has the capability to compete with Joshua Van on the feet, not saying that he would necessarily outbox and outstrike Van, but he will be competent enough to keep the fight relatively even, and if it enters into the grappling realm, it won't even be close. Tatsuro Taira is the best grappler in the flyweight division right now. So if we see Joshua Van versus Tatsuro Taira in 2026, my prediction would be that Tatsuro Taira would dethrone Van via submission. Next, we move to the bantamweight division, where we also saw the title change hands at UFC 323, just like the flyweight division, and that was when Petr Yan got revenge against Merab Dvalishvili and stopped him from making history in 2025. Now, more than likely, we will see these two compete in a trilogy bout due to how great that their fight was at UFC 323, given the fact that they are now tied one apiece, and because Merab Dvalishvili defended the title 3 times last year. But after the performance that Petr Yan put together in December, I believe that he would be able to win that trilogy bout and defend against Merab. Therefore, I feel that the fighter that has the best chance to dethrone Petr Yan right now at bantamweight is Umar Nurmagomedov. Now, first, in order to get to that potential matchup, we would have to see Petr Yan defend his title against Merab in what will likely be a trilogy, and that will also mean that Umar Nurmagomedov will have to defeat Deiveson Figueiredo at UFC 324. And if both of those fights happen, and Petr Yan wins and Umar wins, I think they will be on a collision course with one another in the second half of 2026, and when you break it down from an X's and O's perspective, Umar Nurmagomedov poses a lot of the same threats that Merab does to Petr Yan in the sense of the grappling and the pressing forward and the pace. And while Umar won't attempt 57 takedowns and land 32 of them, he will be very efficient with those takedowns, and when he gets his opponents down, he typically doesn't let them back up, whereas when Merab gets them down, his opponents can get back up just to get drugged back down again. And the biggest difference between Umar and Merab when it comes to facing Petr Yan is that Umar is much more polished and technical on the feet as well, and I believe can definitely at least compete for 25 minutes or less in the striking with Petr Yan. Not saying that he will get the better of the exchanges, but he will be able to compete much closer than what Merab was able to do in their second fight. And so with me predicting that Umar Nurmagomedov would be the one to dethrone Petr Yan, I believe that he would do so by way of a decision in a very, very fun and competitive 25-minute clash. Next, we move to the featherweight division, and we have a two-time champion, much like Petr Yan, and it is Alexander Volkanovski Volkanovski, who won the vacated title back at UFC 314 via decision against Diego Lopez, and now he has his first title defense of his second reign booked, and it is against, Diego Lopez. This fight should absolutely not be happening. It should be Volkanovski versus Lerone Murphy or versus Movsar Evloev, but instead we're going to be seeing the immediate rematch for Volkanovski, but not an immediate rematch for Diego, as he would go on in September of last year to bounce back from the Volkanovski loss by knocking out Jean Silva. And now in the build-up to this fight, that is less than 3 weeks away at the time I'm recording this, I can't escape this feeling that Diego Lopez is going to be able to get revenge and do it in brutal fashion. Him and Volk had a very competitive fight at UFC 314, but the longer that the fight went, you could tell that the experienced veteran in Volk, who had been there and done that against some of the best featherweights of all time, was able to make the proper adjustments and with his fight IQ lead his way to a victory. But it didn't come without some adversity, as Diego Lopez would land some pretty significant damage to Volkanovski over the course of the 25 minutes, and in the rematch on January 31st at UFC 325, I feel that Diego Lopez is going to be able to finish the job this time around. So who will dethrone Alexander Volkanovski in the featherweight division? I believe that it will in fact be Diego Lopez. The UFC is clearly pushing him in this rematch for a reason. They believe in him as a potential star for the company. He has the countries of both Mexico and Brazil on his back in terms of a fan perspective and star potential, and he has the fight style that fight fans absolutely clamor toward and love watching every time he steps in there. And so I feel that Diego Lopez will be able to get the job done at UFC 325 by way of knockout, and he will be the one to dethrone Alexander Volkanovski at featherweight. Next, we move to the 155-pound lightweight division, and things are a little bit murky right now because the champion is Ilia Topuria, but he is currently taking some time away to handle some personal matters in his life, and we are seeing an interim title take place in the meantime between Justin Gaethje and Paddy Pimblett. Now, in that fight, I am personally leaning toward Paddy Pimblett, but I do believe that it could be a very fun and competitive fight where either guy could win. But truthfully, those two shouldn't be the ones fighting for an interim title. I don't mind the fight whatsoever from a stylistic X's and O's perspective. It checks every box from a fight fan. But the man that should be fighting for an interim belt is none other than Arman Tsarukyan. And so who do I believe would defeat Justin Gaethje and Paddy Pimblett? It is Arman Tsarukyan. And who do I believe can dethrone Ilia Topuria and become the undisputed champion? Well, I believe that is also Arman Tsarukyan, because I feel that Ilia Topuria would defeat either Gaethje or Pimblett by way of knockout more than likely, but I do not feel as strong when Ilia Topuria and Arman Tsarukyan would potentially square off with one another. The problem is, I don't even know if we're going to see that fight take place this year. I think that Arman Tsarukyan versus Ilia Topuria is one of the biggest fights that can be made in 2026, especially from just a high-level mixed martial arts perspective, and if they were to fight, I think I would lean Arman Tsarukyan. So, who do I think would dethrone the lightweight champion Ilia Topuria in 2026? It's Arman Tsarukyan, and I believe that he would do it by way of a decision, but we don't even know if we're gonna see it. Time will tell, but that may just have to be a 2027 prediction instead. And now we're about to move into back-to-back weight classes where I truly don't feel that the champion in either division will be dethroned in 2026, but I at least have to give an option to who I think it could be if they were to fight. First, in the welterweight division is the newly minted champion, that is Islam Makhachev, who dethroned Jack Della Maddalena at UFC 322 by dominant decision in Madison Square Garden. There are legitimately 4 people in the welterweight division that could get a welterweight championship fight right now, and I wouldn't bat an eye. Shavkat Rakhmonov, Michael Morales, Ian Machado Gary, and Carlos Prades. In 3 out of those 4, I feel that Islam Makhachev defeats, and relatively easy. But there is one man that I feel could give Islam Makhachev a very dangerous fight, and his name is Shavkat Rakhmonov, who is the undefeated phenom right in his prime. However, he did not fight in 2025, and for that reason, I don't feel that the UFC is going to give him the title shot in his return fight this year. I just think that when it comes to the full realm of mixed martial arts, there is no one else that comes close to Islam right now at 170 other than Shavkat, who has equally as many knockouts as he does submissions. He is very tall, long, rangy, but also has a very thick build, and to be truthful, that is one of the fights that I want to see in 2026. I think, again, much like Ilia Topuria versus Arman Tsarukyan, Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Islam Makhachev is one of the best pound-for-pound mixed martial arts skill set fights that the UFC can book right now. So while it may not happen in 2026, the fighter that I feel has the best chance to dethrone Islam Makhachev at welterweight is Shavkat Rakhmonov, and if that fight were to take place, I think that Shavkat would have to get the job done over the course of a 25-minute decision, as I don't see anyone being able to finish Islam Makhachev right now. Now for the middleweight division, the discussion gets even harder, because while I feel that Islam has success against a majority of the top 15 at welterweight, Khamzat Chimaev may just be able to beat all 15 middleweight fighters on the very same night. Khamzat finally became a UFC champion after years of MMA fans wanting to see that belt wrapped around his waist, and he did so with a very dominant decision, similarly to how Islam was able to dethrone Jack Della Maddalena, and Khamzat did it against Dricus du Plessis at UFC 319 in August. I genuinely feel that I could run down Khamzat Chimaev versus all top 15 ranked middleweights right now and make a very justifiable case that he beats every single one of them, and honestly with ease in a majority of those cases. But if I had to pick one middleweight that could possibly dethrone Khamzat Chimaev, and maybe even in 2026, it would have to be Anthony Fluffy Hernandez. Now first, that would have to mean that Khamzat Chimaev and Nassourdine Imavov settle their business hopefully in the first half of 2026, and that would also mean that Anthony Hernandez would have to defeat Sean Strickland, the former middleweight champion, in their Fight Night main event in Houston come February. And if both of those come to fruition in the back half of 2026, I would love to see Khamzat Chimaev take on Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, and he is the man that has the best potential case at defeating Khamzat in my opinion right now. And that is simply because on the feet, I would lean Anthony Hernandez, and in the grappling, Anthony is no novice when it comes to the canvas. He also has a never say die attitude. His pressure and his pacing is absolutely next level. He never gets tired, so I feel that if Khamzat Chimaev were to continuously take him down, it's possible that he could continue to fight back round after round. The problem is he may not be able to get up, much like Dricus wasn't able to. But if Fluffy can get back up to his feet and even take down Khamzat himself from an offensive wrestling perspective, I think that that throws a huge wrench into things that not a lot of other middleweights can do right now to Chimaev. So if I had to pick one fighter that could dethrone the middleweight champion Khamzat Chimaev, it would be Anthony Hernandez, and I would actually lean him to get it done by way of finish. In between knockout and submission, I would lean a submission for Anthony Hernandez. Next up, we have the light heavyweight division, and the current champion is Alex Pereira after he regained his title at UFC 320 in October by knocking out Magomed Ankalaev, who previously in March of last year at UFC 313 dethroned Pereira by way of decision. And while we don't necessarily have a fight booked for Alex Pereira, we do know that there is a clear-cut number one contender, and his name is Carlos Alberg, off the heels of 9 consecutive wins in a row, if I'm not mistaken, and most recently a vicious knockout in September over Dominic Reyes. Now, the more I think about this fight and the more I look down the top 15 of the light heavyweight division, I feel that Alex Pereira would be able to defeat Carlos Alberg, because that is more than likely going to be a kickboxing affair, and I don't think that anyone can specifically beat Pereira in a straight-up kickboxing match. So realistically, the person with the best odds of beating Alex Pereira is Magomed Ankalaev, considering that he's already done it once before, but I highly doubt that the UFC is going to give him another crack at a title anytime soon. So this might sound crazy, but the man that I feel has the best chance to dethrone Alex Pereira, and maybe in 2026, if Pereira stays at light heavyweight after his fight with Alberg, is Yuri Prohaska. And I realize that that sounds absolutely insane, because Pereira has already beaten Yuri twice by way of knockout. But I genuinely feel that Yuri has yet to reach his prime, and after the 2025 that he had, delivering back-to-back knockouts against Jamal Hill and Khalil Roundtree Jr., the crazy, wild fight style that he possesses, I think that in a potential trilogy with Pereira, he would finally be able to solve the puzzle and get a knockout victory against Pereira to become a 2-time light heavyweight champion. Next, we move to the absolutely in shambles heavyweight division, and the champion is Tom Aspinall, and he made his first title defense of his undisputed title, I should say, because we can't forget that he defended the interim title against Cyril Gane in October at UFC 321, and for the first 4.5 minutes we were in store for one of the best heavyweight bouts that we had seen definitely in the year of 2025, and one of the best over the last few years in general. But then the fight would be halted due to an eye poke given from Cyril Gane to Tom Aspinall, and it would be waved off and ruled a no contest. Tom Aspinall had one surgery in December and is about to have another surgery in January, and we have no clear timetable on when he could return to have the rematch rematch with Ciryl Gane, but I think after their 4.5-minute bout that we saw in October, it's pretty clear that the man that has the best potential to dethrone Tom Aspinall from a stylistic X's and O's skill set is Ciryl Gane. Look at the success that he was having in round 1 of their fight. He is one of very, very few fighters right now in the heavyweight division that can compete tit for tat with Tom Aspinall in the striking realm, and I believe can potentially defend some takedowns from Tom as well, as we saw him do in their first fight. If it's not Ciryl Gane, I genuinely don't think that any of the other top 15 crop of heavyweights right now can defeat Tom Aspinall. So the fighter that has the best chance of dethroning Tom Aspinall in 2026 is Ciryl Gane, and it will be in their rematch. And if he were to get the job done, I actually would lean a Ciryl Gane knockout in rounds 3 or 4 as the fight continues to progress forward and Tom Aspinall doesn't get the success that he once dreamed of getting. Next, we move to the first of 3 women's divisions, and it is the strawweight division that is currently ruled by Mackenzie Dern, as she won the vacant title against Virna Jandiroba at UFC 321 in a fantastic 25-minute bout. And she was competing for the vacated title because Zhang Weili gave that title up to move to 125 pounds in an attempt to chase greatness and become a 2-weight world champion, but Valentina Shevchenko would halt those dreams. So who do I feel at strawweight has the best chance to dethrone Mackenzie Dern in 2026? It is Zhang Weili, because they will likely compete against one another, assuming she comes back down to strawweight to finish out her career. And I believe that this will be a performance from Zhang Weili where she holds a lot of pent-up aggression and wanting to take it out on her opponent Dern, who took the title away from Weili, but not directly, of course. Zhang Weili essentially got shut out by Valentina Shevchenko for 25 straight minutes, and I believe that Zhang Weili would be able to do the same to Mackenzie Dern in their clash, and I would predict Zhang Weili to dethrone Mackenzie Dern by way of knockout. Next up is the women's flyweight division, the best division right now of the 3 women's weight classes in the UFC, and it is currently ruled by the queen, Valentina Shevchenko, who had 2 successful title defenses in her second reign in 2025, decision wins over Manon Fior and the aforementioned Zhang Weili. And while she doesn't have a fight booked just yet, I think it will be against the winner of the UFC 324 bout between Natalia Silva and Rose Namajunas, and my prediction for that fight is that Natalia Silva will defeat Rose, and then the person that I think can dethrone Valentina Shevchenko is Natalia Silva. I believe that she will be a UFC champion by the end of 2026. If there's anyone right now in the flyweight division that can compete from a pure kickboxing perspective with the greatness of Valentina Shevchenko, it is the much younger and in her prime right now, Natalia Silva. And over the course of Valentina's long run at the top of the flyweight division, we've seen her get progressively better in terms of her grappling skill set and utilize it a lot more in her winning fights. But Natalia Silva has a 92% takedown defense, and if she can keep the fight standing, I more than believe that she can go toe-to-toe with Valentina Shevchenko, and if they were to fight, I would predict Natalia Silva to dethrone Shevchenko by way of decision. And last but not least is the women's bantamweight division that is ruled by the queen, Kayla Harrison, after dethroning Juliana Pena at UFC 316 last June, where she would submit her via Kimura. Now, with the current crop of the top 15, number 1 Juliana all the way to number 15 Luana Santos, I don't believe that any of these women can dethrone Kayla Harrison. However, she's not fighting any of them in her next bout. She is fighting the greatest female fighter of all time, Amanda the Lioness Nunes, coming up very shortly at UFC 324. So if there is anyone in the bantamweight division that can defeat Kayla Harrison, the easy cop-out answer for me would be Amanda Nunes, and that would be by way of knockout. So those are the fighters that I feel have the best chance to dethrone every current UFC champion in 2026, and now it's your turn. I turn it over to you. Which champions do you think will hold on to their titles this year, and which champions do you think will lose their titles? And if so, who will be the one to dethrone them? And for an extra credit point, how do you think it will happen? If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new, because we are still inching closer and closer to that YouTube milestone of 1,000 subscribers, and any and all support is greatly appreciated. You can also join the discussion on social media at Verbal Spar MMA on X, Instagram, and TikTok, as well as like the Facebook page Verbal Sparring MMA, and you can follow on your favorite audio listening platforms such as Spotify and Apple, where during peak fight season, podcast episodes release every Monday and Friday. Have a great week, and I will see you all in the next video.